failed. Like we succeeded by trying something new in a nascent, exciting space. It didn't develop the way we thought it would. We decided that's not the right place for us to focus. Let's put those resources somewhere else.
Just to clarify, I'm usually on the do fewer things side of that argument.
So what sort of technical impediments do you think the ledger has faced over the past, since the origins, and how have you overcome those?
There really have not been that many technical impediments. It's kind of surprising how well these things work technically. I mean, they're not infinitely scalable. There's always fear of security issues, but there haven't really, at least in the XRP ledger space, knock on wood, we really haven't had technical problems. I think the biggest problem, and I talked about it a little bit just a few minutes ago, because of the XRP ledger's design, it's different from other blockchains in some important ways. So like transaction fees are very small because there is nobody who's profiting from it. That's good. It's fixed function, which means you don't have some of the security problems that you have with smart contracts. But the downside is that adding new features is slow. And so like, adding the AMM feature took 2 years. It's great. It came out really nicely, but it would have, other blockchains probably could have deployed something much faster and did.
And Brad wants to do 1,000 different things, so that makes it challenging.
Yeah. I'm not going to argue with that.
So, whilst there haven't been that many technical challenges per se, although maybe not being able to move as fast as you would like to is one of them, there have been a lot of just macro and general crypto problems that have trickled down to XRPL and the firm Ripple as well. But those seem to be improving, Brett. Is that a fair take? I mean, at least from a regulatory perspective, XRP is now backlisted on Coinbase and trading. That's good news. But it's not 100% maybe where the industry would need it or want it to be.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think as you reflect on the last handful of years, we'll call it 4 or 5 years, there are things that are super frustrating. Why did the SEC go after XRP kind of first, if you will? In some ways, you look at that now and you say, we're almost at the very, very end of that journey. I think that, hopefully we have resolution. We can't control that now. The judge, will make the decision when she makes the decision. My estimation is sometime before the end of the summer. Somebody asked me, is at the end of August? I pointed out that September 21st is the end of summer. So I don't know, sometime there.
I think my birthday, August 28th, that's the end of summer.
You know what? I'll ask her if we could celebrate your birthday with that. That would be, we'll all celebrate with you.
We'll call the judge.
But look, it has been frustrating. What has been exciting is the momentum that has been building. I mean, look, there are 3 times as many people here as the last Apex. This community is more active, more vibrant, more entrepreneurial. I mean, it's just awesome. Like I see the momentum and the excitement here, and it's just very palpable. The U.S. market remains, frankly, a laggard. The U.S. regulatory environment, even though Ripple is at the tail end of that, and I think it's strange to me that XRP is in such a unique position and that the market hasn't kind of rewarded that. XRP in the US is one of the few things we can say definitively is not a security. With ETH, I don't know how this is going to play out, right? Apparently Wells notices, which is the SEC kind of pre-warning that we're going to file a lawsuit, have been gone out to consensus, purportedly, as I've read, maybe on your side as well, to consensus. We know the Ethereum Foundation has received various inquiries. So look, it's super frustrating. And even it's not just the SEC. The United States kind of current administration with Gary Gensler as the head of the SEC has been pretty hostile towards crypto. But look, you asked the macro question. That has been frustrating. I think we're on largely on the other side of that. And it's the reason why I'm so excited. And hearing David talk about what's going on in the XRP ledger, I look at the next 5 years and what this community may look like 5 years from now, and I get very excited about it.
David, what does that look like from the perspective of client engagement and the penetration of certain products in the U.S. market? Has sort of the shift that Brad described, has that translated into more business effectively?
Not too much in the U.S. market. Globally, we get hung up on the U.S. market. It's an important, critical piece. Obviously, I'm an American. I would love to see the United States be a hub for innovation in crypto. It looks like the United States, at least, we'll see. But I just want to point out that like business outside of the United States is great. I mean, the regulatory challenges are much, much more tractable. But, Ripple has licensing in many countries, and we're launching payments products and other things. In the United States, enterprise adoption is much more difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably tied to some of those the regulatory overhang that we're describing. So there's those issues with institutions and maybe financial services firms. From a retail perspective or a consumer perspective, I reckon they're less concerned about Gary Gensler, just more concerned about these things being difficult to use, right? So I was listening to your talk this morning, obviously, as we all were, and I'm curious to get both of your take on how mass adoption occurs. Obviously, I think one component's going to be making this stuff easier to use.
Yeah.
I think the fact that Iggy Azalea followed me on Twitter this morning is a good sign for mass adoption. But what else is it going to take?
Well, user experience is super, super critical. You can't, if you have to understand the technology in order to get it to work, there was a time when you had to understand cars to drive a car. You had to understand copying machines to have a copying machine. We have to turn that corner. But I think the other thing is that we need products that meet needs that real people actually have. One of the things that I mentioned in my talk is like, for most of us, we're very well connected to the financial system, and getting money into and out of a blockchain is not difficult for us. But if you're someone who, doesn't have a whole bunch of money that you can just, send off and not be able to get to for a while, on-ramps and off-ramps are critical, interoperability, like all of those things. But really what it comes down to is just the user experience has to be great, and it has to solve a problem people actually have. It can't just be interesting. It's like, oh, it's really cool that it can do this thing, right? It has to solve a problem people actually have.
One of the things David also talked about on stage earlier today is he had been around in the earliest days of the internet, kind of the internet 1.0. I'm a lot younger than him, but I also was around. Why is that funny?
I don't know.
Wow, Frank, shots fired. I was around those days as well, and I think one of the things that really catalyzed the growth of kind of the internet 1.0 was usability.
Yeah.
Mosaic came out as a first browser that evolved into Netscape. That trying to use some of these technologies that predated the browser as we know it. I mean, people can't even think about the internet before a browser. Mm-hmm. But those things didn't exist until I think 92, 93. Mm-hmm. That was the explosive growth. And so I think, again, when I think about the big picture where we're going over the next 5 years, 10 years, I think we are now focused on abstraction layers that can actually, we don't need to know how the technology works. We don't need to know how SMTP works to send an email. Mm-hmm. Why do we need to know how to do things with core layer 1 technologies in order to take advantage of them?
Or bridging and the like. Things are getting better, though. I mean,
for sure.
I think a lot of folks outside the industry or a skeptical person might think that the whole, baseball analogy, first inning, or maybe we're still in the dugout tying our shoes.
Well, I think because we're in Amsterdam, we can't use baseball.
Yeah, whatever sport they play here. Soccer. I'm sure it's a great sport. Soccer.
Soccer is the safe bet, except they call it football.
First quarter of soccer. Or football.
Yeah, they call it football.
On the pitch.
They're going to tar and feather me. No, but in all seriousness, it sounds like Cope, right? That we're in the first inning, or it's still early, but to a degree, I mean, this stuff takes a lot of time and energy. One product that probably has found the best product market fit is probably stablecoin, if you look at the adoption of those. And let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about maybe the new name of the stablecoin.
Let's do that. David made some news earlier this morning. More news that we're going to...
It's like a gender reveal conference.
That's why they need both parents.
The name of the Ripple stablecoin will be RLUSD. I like to call it Real USD, Ripple USD. We're very excited about this. I also will emphasize, as I've emphasized many times, we think this is very much complementary, additive to what the overall XRP ecosystem is doing. Anything we do in mind of how do we make sure XRP is as successful as possible for everyone here. Having, as David talked about stablecoins this morning, having liquidity on chain, having the bridging, and frankly, better on-ramps and off-ramps, that's good for everybody. In no way does that take away from our commitment and our desire to see the XRP ecosystem continue to grow.
How did it become XRPL and stablecoins versus, it seems like, at least if you rewind the clock a few years ago, XRPL would have been an alternative to stablecoins, or sort of a reason for stablecoins maybe not even to exist. How did that shift happen?
Well, I think one key thing to look at is just the way the DeFi universe sort of evolved, that you have stablecoins as a key enabler for DeFi. One of the things is that they're stable, and there's some cases where volatile assets are very useful, and there's other cases where volatile assets are not that useful. Like if you're trying to do things like volatility harvesting, you need volatility to harvest. But stablecoins, like for pricing things and for holding things for like dry powder and trading when you don't want to be in the market, you really do need both. If you're going to have an AMM, there has to be at least two assets, right, that people are trading. If you're going to have liquidity, it has to be liquidity between two assets. So you have to have, multiple types of asset and multiple asset classes. When you work for Brad, you learn these things called Bradisms. There's things that Brad says all the time.
Let's change the subject back to the stock.
We're not going there.
By the way, my wife has been learning Bradisms to use back at me, and so I'll be having a conversation with her, and she'll say to me, "I feel like you're trying to manage me," and I'm like, "Oh no," because if you ever hear that from Brad, you are screwed. You rethink all the choices that led you to that position. No, he is, but one of the Bradisms, as he was saying, is or. The power of or versus the tyranny of and. Sometimes things are not alternatives. You can have both of them, and there have to be options. People are going to have different use cases and different demands and needs. And the XRP has a privileged place on the XRP ledger. Through pathfinding, always looks for XRP liquidity first. The auto bridging causes trades to automatically look at XRP liquidity where they don't automatically look at any other liquidity. So XRP is always going to have a privileged place as a bridge asset on the XRP ledger, and the stablecoin ecosystem is not going to change that. It's just going to enable more use cases.
So how would you describe those use cases to a potential big ticket client? How would you say, Brad, here's the value proposition of XRP and XYZ use case, here's the value proposition?
I don't think about it that way. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, that customers don't care which technology you're using. They want their problem solved. One of Ripple's core kind of go-to-market products has been around payments. You don't go and say, well, hey, this is how we're going to do these things and get into the weeds necessarily. You approach them and say, okay, let's talk about corridors that are priorities. Let's talk about how you're managing liquidity today and how you're pre-funding, and how we can reduce those costs, how we can improve the speed at which that's happening. More often than not, the fact that it's happening through a stablecoin. I mean, today, as I think you and I have talked about before, Ripple uses stablecoins in our payment flows today. We've used USDT, we've used USDC. Actually, I may not even know. We may have used other things that we don't necessarily go to the customer and say, here's exactly how this is happening. So I think about it really as part of that abstraction we're talking about for mass adoption. I mean, this is on the enterprise side, but they want a problem solved. And one of the things I certainly talk a lot about in the crypto macro ecosystem is we got to focus on utility. We got to focus on problems. If we're just focusing on kind of hype cycles or speculation, that's not sustainable over the long haul. And I think certainly what Ripple's trying to do is to treat it that way, as be clear about who our customer is, be clear about what problem we're solving for them.
So what is the big problem that customers are facing?
Well, I think in the payment space, pre-funding and funds not being available when they need them, holidays, banking hours, those types of problems in the conventional financial space, liquidity being fractured. You use a payment company and you're stuck with whatever liquidity they have access to. One of the earliest visions that I had for the XRP ledger was public pools of liquidity that anyone could contribute to. and draw off of. I think in other interesting spaces like real world asset tokenization, there are all the obstacles of reaching customers, and there's all the obstacles of like the administrative overhead. If you're talking about things like fractional ownership, just like the overhead of doing these things in the conventional financial space is just very, very painful. And it's promising that they can launch things like tokenized real world assets on chain markets that streamline all of the pain points that they have, but also that enable access to a much broader base of customers. So like lending, a good example is who can provide the capital for lending. You can be very good at lending, but become capital constrained. Whereas if you could raise capital on a blockchain, then you sort of decouple the lending from the capital provision.